The story you're about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts about historical characters, events, or locations. Please sit back and listen as I narrate this story to you. Frank Costello was a powerful mobster who survived several mob wars, government investigation, and an assassination attempt to control the powerful National Commission of Mafia bosses founded by Lucky Luciano. Costello was born Francesco Castiglia on January 26, 1891 in Italy as the youngest of 6 children in a family from Cosenzo, a mountain village in Calabria, a province in southern Italy. In 1895, he immigrated to the United States and settled in Manhattan. He was a member of the 104th Street Gang and later became its leader. Costello, like other future mobsters, was a member of the 5 Points Gang in Lower Manhattan as a teenager. Costello was arrested for assault and robbery at the ages of 17 and 21, but alibis provided by relatives and friends resulted in his acquittals. He was arrested at the age of 23 for carrying a concealed weapon and served 10 months in prison. He later claimed that he never packed a gun again and that his prison sentence taught him to get results through logic rather than violence. Francesco Castiglia was released from prison and legally changed his name to Frank Costello, presumably because he felt an Irish name sounded more American. After being released in 1917, he fell in love with his childhood friend, Loretta Jigerman, and married her in 1918. Soon after his marriage, he began working for Ciro Terranova, a Morello crime family capo in East Harlem. Costello met Lucky Luciano while working for the Morello gang and became fast friends with him. Mayor Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, and Gaetano Lucchesi joined them as partners. This alliance would serve as the foundation for the National Crime Syndicate, which began in New York. Initially involved in robbery, extortion, theft, gambling, and narcotics, the group later shifted its focus to bootlegging during the Prohibition era. Arnold Rothstein funded their bootlegging in the 1920s. Costello rose to prominence as a top bootlegger. He was especially successful in transporting large amounts of expensive Scotch whiskey from Canada to the New York area. Frank Costello's reputation for being able to make friends with the right police officers, judges, and politicians earned him the title Prime Minister of the Underworld. Because of these connections, the syndicate was able to obtain favors from judges, cops, politicians, district attorneys, and city officials. Control of the local government soon sparked a power struggle between 2 syndicate members. The Massilia and the Maranzano families soon went to war, and the syndicate was split. Costello, Lansky, Luciano, and Siegel decided to kill the heads of both families to win the war and continue their business. Costello was charged with importing liquor to New York City docks in 1926, but the charges were dropped after a jury deadlock in 1927. In New York, Costello took over Dwyer's bootlegging operations. This caused conflict and eventually war with other Dwyer lieutenants. While the conflict cost Costello some of his business operations, his influence as a mobster grew. Costello had formed a crucial alliance with Luciano, Lansky, Siegel, and Chicago's Johnny Torrio by 1928. In 1929, the dictatorial Masseria went to war with another Sicilian challenger, Salvatore Maranzano, for control of New York City's liquor, gambling, and prostitution rackets. Costello and Luciano were on opposing sides of the bloody Castellammarese War, which Maranzano won, but Maranzano would unilaterally declare himself boss of all bosses, and as a result, with the help of gunmen supplied by Luciano, would be killed by gunfire by the end of 1931. Luciano took over as chairman of the board of the 5 families known as the Commission, with Vito Genovese as top deputy or the underboss, and Costello as his powerful consigliere or top advisor. In a deal with Governor Huey Long and New Orleans crime boss Carlos Marcello, Costello assisted the Luciano family in expanding their operations to include slot machines in Louisiana. The Louisiana contingent got 10% of the take. Costello and Lansky invested in illegal gambling in Florida and Cuba, and he began standardizing the system of accepting and distributing bets among bookmakers, not just in New York but nationally. After Prohibition ended in 1933, expanding gambling operations on a national and international scale was a wise decision. As Prohibition came to an end, Costello focused on expanding his gambling and bookmaking operations. One of his brilliant ideas was to set up layoff pools. Costello allowed smaller bookmakers to transfer or spread bets to his organization for a fee. They could lay off part of their bets to Costello's pools when they were overloaded with wagers on one team or horse and faced huge losses if their customers collectively picked one big winner. Even before Prohibition was repealed, New York's gangland recognized Costello's massive success as the king of the slots in a sure-thing gambling gimmick. One of his front companies, the aptly named True Mint Novelty Company, ostensibly a candy vending machine outfit, was the largest supplier of illegal slot machines to mom-and-pop groceries, small soda fountains, and other neighborhood shops. Costello's 25,000 one-armed bandits grossed about $500,000 per day at the height of the slots craze in the early 1930s. Even though he had to share some of his profits with Luciano and others in the Borgata, his profits were enormous. Naturally, there were protection payments made to Tammany Hall and police officials to persuade them to disregard the gambling laws. When Republican and Fusion Party Mayor Fiorello H. LaGuardia's reform administration ousted the Tammany Democrats from City Hall in 1934, things became difficult for Costello. LaGuardia's police raids on slot suppliers uncovered records revealing that Costello's machine brought in $37 million in 1932 alone. The feisty LaGuardia, vowing to rid the city of tin-horn gamblers and racketeers, gained enormous publicity by personally wielding an axe to destroy confiscated machines and dumping them into the river. While LaGuardia's campaign did succeed in ridding the city of slot machines, Costello found a new home for his collection. He flooded bars and clubs in New Orleans and suburban homes with his one-armed moneymakers, forming a partnership with the Southern Mafia family and the corrupt Huey Long political machine in Louisiana. At that time, New Orleans was so open to bookmakers, roulette wheels, and high-stakes card games that visitors had no idea gambling was illegal in the state. The LaGuardia administration's anti-slots crusade was a minor annoyance that had little impact on Costello's or other mafia families' overall operations. Luciano was convicted of prostitution in 1936 and sentenced to decades in prison. Genovese took over as boss, but he was indicted on 3-year-old murder charges a year later and fled to Italy, leaving Costello in charge of Luciano's former operation. He kept the prostitution and gambling rackets going while expanding legitimate businesses like large poultry and meat packing operations. He avoided drug importation, a lucrative industry favored by Genovese, who had become a top mafia boss in Italy. Genovese had formed an alliance with the fascist leadership in Italy, as well as friendship with dictator Benito Mussolini's son-in-law, to whom he allegedly provided cocaine. During World War II, Genovese allegedly ordered the murder of an Italian anti-fascist publisher in New York City as a favor to Mussolini, a hit carried out by a Bonanno crime family enforcer. However, after the Allies defeated Italy in 1943, Genovese switched sides and worked for the Allied occupation government. Nonetheless, he faced charges for the 1934 murder and he was returned to New York in 1945 to face trial. 2 of the 3 government witnesses were murdered during the trial, and the prosecution crumbled. When Genovese was released in 1946, he immediately began working to reclaim his position as head of the family, which had been taken over by Costello. Costello was summoned to appear before the Kefauver Committee in 1951. Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee and his colleagues agreed that Costello could testify before the committee with only his hands visible on television. The cameras focused on his hands during his 3 days of testimony, with close-ups of his cuticles, his fingers drumming on the table, and his hands clasping and unclasping. Costello's eerie combination of hands and his accented, gravel, crunching voice cast him in a more sinister and mysterious role than simply showing his face on television. His hands became a terrifying symbol of a previously unseen criminal empire. The television audience was unaware of the medical explanation for the frightening sounds emanating from their sets. Costello's vocal cords had been damaged during an unsuccessful surgery to remove throat polyps, resulting in a harsh and natural timbre. His raspy voice was the inspiration for Marlon Brando's voice in the film The Godfather. Despite testifying, Costello refused to answer hostile questions and avoided others. The only light moment in his spectator laughter came when a senator, referring to Costello's alleged illegal gambling operations, asked what he had done for America in exchange for the wealth he had amassed. "Paid my tax," Costello retorted. Willie Moretti, Costello's deputy, also testified before the Kefauver hearings, revealing details of the mob's infiltration of legitimate businesses. Moretti was later assassinated in 1951 by another mobster. Costello was convicted of contempt in 1952 after walking out of a Senate hearing. He was sentenced to 14 months in prison for this offense. He was found guilty of tax evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison in April 1954. He was sentenced to prison for several years before his conviction was overturned on appeal. Even while imprisoned, Costello was able to run his crime family and transmit orders from behind bars via trusted intermediaries. Meanwhile, Genovese was quietly plotting his coup against Costello. On Genovese's orders, hitman Vincent the Chin Gigante shot Costello in the head in May 1957. Fortunately for Costello, the wound was only superficial. It was close enough for Costello, who stepped down from the throne and handed over the control of the Luciano family to Genovese. The crime family, founded by Luciano and built by Costello, is now known as the Genovese crime family. Costello continued to control and profit from gambling operations across the United States, including some in Las Vegas, and despite having his citizenship revoked in 1961, he continued to live in New York. He was regarded as a top mafia boss and commanded the respect of mob capos who sought his advice. He kept in touch with Luciano, who died in Italy in 1962, and Lansky. Frank Costello, the retired prime minister of the Underworld, who survived a gangland execution attempt and successfully resisted U.S. government efforts to deport him to his native Italy, died at 7 a.m. on February 18, 1973, in a Manhattan hospital. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took time out of your day to listen to my narration. This is Nikki of Twysted Mind, and I'd like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Salamat!